Chapter 1, The Canvas of Time. Long before cities, before kings and calendars, before words had shape or sound, there was fire. Deep in the stone belly of the earth, where the air was heavy and still, early humans gathered. The flicker of torchlight danced against rough stone walls, casting shadows that seemed alive. It was here, in these prehistoric sanctuaries, that painting was born. These caves were not shelters. They were something else sacred, mysterious. In the darkness, fingers dipped in ochre, in ash, in charcoal. They pressed against the stone, not randomly, but deliberately. A red handprint, a galloping bison, arrows flying from invisible bows. These were not decorations. They were rituals. Memories. Prayers. In places like Lascaux in France or Altamira in Spain, we find evidence of a language born not from tongues but from vision. The artists, if that is the right word, used the curves of the cave walls to give animals movement, using only the simplest tools. They crushed minerals for color. They used hollow reeds to blow pigment. They etched lines with flint. They crouched in silence, listening to the heartbeat of stone. Why did they paint? Perhaps to call the hunt. Perhaps to remember the dead. Perhaps to mark a moment in a world without clocks. Whatever the reason, the result was powerful. In these quiet, echoing chambers, the first storytellers told not with words, but with pigment. The cave was their canvas. The soul, their ink, symbols before speech's time passed and humans began to gather in tribes, then villages, then cities. The pictures did not fade. They changed. They became more than images, they became symbols. In every corner of the ancient world, from the rock shelters of Australia to the canyons of the American Southwest, symbols began to tell stories. A spiral might mean the sun. A zigzag could mean water. A handprint, the self. These images were not just for beauty. They carried meaning, warnings, celebrations. Before the alphabet, before even spoken myths were shared, these marks carried memory. Some of the earliest writing systems, like the Sumerian cuneiform or Egyptian hieroglyphs, were born from these picture languages. The line between word and image was thin, like a crack in a pot, fine, but deep. Artists were scribes. Scribes were storytellers. The brush and the reed were tools of the same craft. Remembrance. In temples and on tomb walls, people painted their worlds, the harvest, the heavens, the hunt. Color was symbolic. Blue was the sky, green for life, red for power. Even then, before the written word ruled, color and form shaped understanding. It was painting that first tried to make sense of time, life, and death, stone kings and sacred. Walls. With the rise of great civilizations, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, painting rose too. But now, it served not just the spirit, but the state. Kings and priests ordered art as proof of power. And still, the brush did not lose its soul. In Egypt, walls came alive with color, not just to decorate tombs, but to guide the dead. Scenes of the afterlife, of daily life, of gods and pharaohs filled the sacred chambers. The artists followed strict rules: profile heads, forward eyes, balanced limbs. Yet within those rules, they found beauty. The desert sun could not bleach. Those colors, they endure even now. In Mesopotamia, On cylinder seals and temple mosaics, artists told of wars, of peace, of stars and gods. Their art was small, yet precise, each line a word in stone dot. In Greece, painting found the body. On pottery, on walls, in tales sung and shown, painters celebrated motion, emotion, proportion. They played with realism, light, and shade. The gods were no longer distant figures, they became human, visible, close, and in Rome, art became empire. Frescoes bloomed in villas, and mosaics paved the floors of palaces. Landscapes, myths, portraits all appeared in dazzling detail. Art moved indoors, onto plaster, into life. The painter now stood alongside the poet and philosopher. Though much of Roman painting has faded, what remains shows skill, depth, and an understanding of how light touches flesh, how shadow tells story. The walls spoke. The brush had become a voice, the rise of icon and illumination. When Rome fell and the ancient world dimmed, painting changed again. It became sacred. In the Byzantine Empire and early Christian Europe, artists painted not for kings, but for God, icons. Flat, glowing images of saints and Christ emerged in golden silence. These were not portraits. They were windows into heaven. Painters fasted before they painted. They prayed with each stroke. Their colors were symbolic: gold for divinity, blue for truth, red for sacrifice. Every line followed a code. Every face reflected the eternal. Mosaics shimmered on church ceilings. Paintings adorned panels and parchment. The art was not about realism. It was about light divine, unchanging, and in monasteries, a quiet miracle was taking place. The age of illumination. Monks by candlelight bent over pages. With the tip of a brush or a quill, they filled manuscripts with color, with life. Letters danced with dragons. Margins bloomed with flowers. The sacred and the beautiful met on vellum. These painters did not sign their names. They worked for glory, not fame. But through their work, painting survived. It passed from cave walls to cathedral domes, from ochre hands to golden halos, from memory to myth. This is how painting began, in shadow and in prayer, in pigment and light. A journey through time, across stone and parchment. A whisper in color, a song without sound. Chapter 2. Da Vinci's Mirror. In a small village nestled among the gentle hills of Tuscany, a boy stood alone in the fields. The sky above him was vast and soft. The wheat around him whispered secrets to the breeze. This was Leonardo, not yet a master, not yet a name, just a child with wide eyes and a quiet hunger to understand. He watched everything. The flight of birds, the way their wings angled into the wind. He crouched by streams, tracing ripples with his fingers, wondering why water curved the way it did. He followed ants across stones, studying how they moved in perfect lines without a map. No motion escaped him. No pattern passed unnoticed. Even shadows fascinated him, how they shifted with the sun, how they changed the shape of the world. The rustle of leaves, the glint of fish under the water, the way clouds moved like thoughts across the sky, all of it, to Leonardo, was a language waiting to be read. He had no formal schooling. Born outside of marriage, he was not expected to do great things. But he learned by watching, by asking. His world was his classroom. His questions never stopped. This boy, still barefoot in the dust, already saw what others missed. He drew not to copy, but to understand. A bird's wing, a curled fern, a human hand, each sketch was a step toward seeing more clearly. Even then, Leonardo's gaze was different. Where others saw beauty, he saw design. Where others saw motion, he saw cause. He was not only an artist. He was a mirror reflecting the world back with startling clarity, portraits of the Suliars. Past. The boy grew into a man, and the man became a painter. But Leonardo did not simply paint what he saw. He painted what he felt, what he sensed, what he studied. His brush reached beyond skin, into soul dot in the Mona Lisa. He gave the world a mystery. Her eyes follow you. Her smile is both warm and distant, knowing and unreadable. But look deeper. The folds of her dress, the fading landscape behind her, the way light touches her skin, it is all deliberate. He studied the muscles of the face, the way emotion flickers like light behind the eyes. He painted not just her face, but her presence, and then the Last Supper. Not a quiet dinner, but a moment caught like lightning. Each apostle reacts to Christ's words. Their hands reach, their mouths open, their eyes widen. The table is long, the room real, the figures alive. Leonardo did not just paint the event. He painted the impact. Emotion moves across the canvas like wind. He studied how people think, how they speak with posture and gesture. He saw how fear narrows the eyes, how joy lifts the mouth, how guilt can turn a body inward. His art was anatomy and empathy combined. For Leonardo, the human face was not just a surface. It was a story, a window, a moment captured not in paint, but in breath. Lines that never slept. Leonardo kept notebooks, thousands of pages, filled with sketches, diagrams, questions, inventions, machines that flew, bridges that moved, studies of the spine, the skull, the heart. Pages filled with mirror writing, his left-handed scrawl moving right to left, as if his thoughts didn't want to be followed too quickly. He dissected bodies, not to disturb, but to discover. He wanted to know how muscles wrapped around bones, how blood flowed, how the lungs filled, how the eye received light. His sketches were not cold. They were filled with dot in one notebook. He drew a fetus curled inside a womb. In another, he mapped the human foot, every tendon and joint labeled. With care, his lines were clean, purposeful, curious. They pulsed with life, but Leonardo's notebooks were more than anatomy. They were dreams. Designs for flying machines based on bat wings, plans for water pumps and siege engines, ideas for cities where waste would not pool in the streets. He saw problems centuries ahead and quietly tried to solve them with ink and paper. His mind never rested. He moved from one subject to another, like a bee among flowers. He studied geology, astronomy, optics. He was not interested in one answer. He wanted to understand everything. And he believed everything was connected. These lines, restless and precise, were not random. They were Leonardo's way of thinking out loud, of seeing with his hands. His sketches are not remnants, they are records of a mind too wide for its time. Art as observation for Leonardo. Painting was not decoration. It was understanding. Nature was his greatest teacher. He watched how light broke into colors through water, how the muscles of a horse moved beneath the skin, how the smile of a child could change with a flicker of light. He believed the artist must study the world, not just to copy it, but to see it truly. To paint a tree, you must know how it grows. To draw a face, you must know how it feels. Art to him was the deepest form of observation. He spent hours watching water flow. He believed its movement mirrored human emotion, calm, violent, still, or wild. He painted the curls of waves as if they were thoughts. In rocks, he saw time. In clouds, he saw design. Leonardo did not separate science from art. To him, they were one. Both were rooted in seeing and looking closely, deeply. He believed that wonder was the first step to wisdom, and so he painted not just what was seen, but what was known, what was imagined. His brush was guided not only by the eye, but by thought. He left behind few completed works. He was always beginning, always revising. But what he did finish changed how we see not just the world, but ourselves. Leonardo da Vinci did not just live in the world. He reflected it like a mirror, sharp and deep. A mirror that still catches light, still asks questions, still shows us what we might become. Chapter 3, Michelangelo's Chisel of Heaven. In the quiet halls of the Vatican, there stands a sculpture so delicate, so impossibly alive, that even marble seems to breathe. The Piet, a young mother cradling her son, lifeless, broken, divine. Her robes flow like fabric, yet are stone. Her face is peace wrapped around sorrow. And Christ, limp in her arms, is carved not just as a man, but as something more, something sacred. Michelangelo was only in his early 20s when he made it. The marble had been seen by others as flawed, too narrow, too difficult. But to Michelangelo, it whispered potential. He once said he did not carve figures, he released them, as if the form was already inside the stone, waiting to be revealed. Years later, he would return to the block, this time with fury and strength. From it emerged David, towering, still, defiant. Not the boy with a sling, but a man with purpose. Muscles tensed, gaze locked forward. This was not victory. This was the moment before. With David, Michelangelo carved time itself, the instant when courage rises but fate has not yet spoken. Every vein, every curl of hair, every angle of light on that marble body deliberate. To look at David is to feel stillness rumbled out in both works. Michelangelo did not just copy life. He exposed what was beneath it: emotion, pressure, glory, grief. His chisel was not a tool. It was an invitation to see the soul hidden in silence. The ceiling of the Scythe Chapel was small, but the task was vast. Paint the ceiling, the very vault of heaven, with scenes from the beginning of time. Michelangelo, a sculptor at heart, resisted. He had never painted on such a scale. He did not want it, but he took the commission. For 4 years. He worked, mostly alone, high on scaffolding, lying on his back with paint dripping into his eyes. The Sistine Chapel became his world. Day after day, he climbed. Day after day, he painted. Creation unfolded above him, God reaching toward Adam. There, fingers inches apart, the spark of life suspended in space. Around them, prophets twist in contemplation. Sibyls gaze beyond time. The ancestors of Christ, the fall of man, the flood, it is all there. A cathedral of color and form. What Michelangelo did was more than decoration. He painted the story of humanity, not with soft beauty, but with force. Muscles stretch, bodies turn, eyes burn. Each panel bursts with energy, as if the figures are still moving within the plaster, and all of it every rib. Every face, every swirl of sky was shaped by one man, in silence, under pressure. With no one but the heavens to witness his fatigue, when he finished, the world stepped back in awe. It was not just a ceiling. It was a map of spirit, a cry to the divine, a reminder that even stone and paint can become something eternal, muscle. Motion Majestic Michelangelo did not see the body as flesh. He saw it as architecture, a sacred structure built of strength and balance. Every sculpture, every painted figure, pulses with motion held still. He studied anatomy relentlessly. He dissected. He sketched. He watched how weight shifted when a foot lifted, how the spine curved in sleep, how a hand might clench in thought. But it wasn't only science. It was reverence. His bodies were not perfect in the way of statues. They were perfect in the way of storms, powerful, unpredictable, breathtaking. The Libyan Sibyl, twisting as she turns a page. Moses, seated but ready to rise with wrath. The slaves, half finished, straining as if still trying to free themselves. From the marble, Michelangelo's forms were not passive. They were alive, caught mid-breath. Muscles swelled not from pride, but from purpose. Movement was his message. Not stillness, but transition. Even in unfinished work, the motion is loud. A shoulder tense with burden, a knee shifting forward, a brow furrowed in concentration. His subjects were never at rest. They were on the verge of action, of understanding, of transcendence. To Michelangelo, the human body was divine design. He honored it not through idealization, but through truth. Every muscle was a prayer. Every limb a hymn. Wrath, glory, silence, but behind the marble and the fresco, there was a man in conflict. Michelangelo lived in tension between heaven and earth, body and soul, solitude and service. He was devout, yet defiant, gifted, yet tormented. He rarely slept. He barely ate. He wore simple clothes until they wore away. Fame did not soothe him. Praise did not satisfy him. He wrote poetry, verses full of longing, of struggle. He spoke of fire in the blood, of being pulled between the world and the spirit. His relationship with God was not gentle. It was a storm. He did not paint for peace. He painted to wrestle with meaning. In the Last Judgment, he painted souls rising and falling, heaven above and hell below. It is vast, violent, and vulnerable. And in it, Michelangelo placed himself, his own face, tired and distorted, held in the hands of Saint Bartholomew. A silent confession, a cry. He believed creation came with pain, that beauty demanded sacrifice, that the act of shaping the divine left the artist scraped raw, and so he worked alone, intense, unyielding, not to be remembered, but to remember, to bring the invisible into view, to touch the eternal, if only for a moment. Michelangelo did not just carve or paint. He revealed. He wrestled. He prayed with stone and color, and in doing so, he gave the world something rare, not just art, but awe. Chapter 4. The Dutch Soul of Rembrandt. In a modest studio nestled within the bustling streets of 17th century Amsterdam, Rembrandt van Rijn stood before his canvas. The scent of oil and linseed hung heavy in the air, mingling with the quiet creak of wooden floorboards beneath his feet. Here, he did not just paint. He listened, not to the world outside, but to the people who sat before him, and to the silent truths written across their faces. Rembrandt was no court painter, no flatterer of egos. He did not seek to polish his subjects into grandeur. Instead, he captured what time had carved into them: fatigue, wisdom, worry, and warmth. His sitters were not just figures, but souls, their stories etched into every wrinkle and fold of flesh. The merchant's wife with eyes full of unshed grief. The old man whose hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from memory. The child, barely still, cheeks flushed with life, curiosity flickering like candlelight in their gaze. Each portrait was a whisper of mortality. Rembrandt painted life not as it should be, but as it was honest, imperfect, and deeply human. His own face appeared in his canvases again and again, aging with each year. In self-portraits spanning decades, he offered no vanity. Instead, he offered truth. He aged not with shame, but with acceptance, each line a chapter dot in a time when portraiture was often a performance. Rembrandt created a quiet revolution. He made the ordinary sacred. He made the overlooked eternal. The faces he painted still breathe today, through the dust of centuries, reminding us that to be human is to be seen, truly seen, and still loved, the light that fell like memory in Rembrandt's world. Light did not simply illuminate, it revealed. He mastered chiaroscuro, the dance of light and shadow, not as a trick of technique, but as a language of feeling. To Rembrandt, light was not clarity, it was emotion, nostalgia, sometimes even mercy. The glow in his paintings often seemed to fall from nowhere, not the sun, not the moon, but from within. It bathed a widow's cheek, lingered on a soldier's sleeve, kissed the knuckles of a praying hand. This light did not brighten the room. It deepened it. It softened edges, held silence, and asked us to pause. Rembrandt studied light like a poet studies words. He saw how a single shaft could divide a face into two stories, one of public resolve, the other of private sorrow. In his painting, The Jewish Bride, the man's hand rests gently on the woman's chest, and the light rests there too, as if blessing the gesture. In The Philosopher in Meditation, light spills like thought, slow and circular, pulling us into reflection without asking us to understand. This was not the brilliance of daylight. It was the warmth of memory. It was the hush of late afternoon when the room glows and the world forgets to speak. It was the light of moments we can never quite explain, but always remember. To stand before a Rembrandt is to feel this weightless illumination, a light that does not chase darkness away, but holds it, honors it, lets it stay. He painted not what the eye sees, but what the heart feels when it finally opens. The watch that wasn't still in 1642, Rembrandt unveiled a painting unlike any that had come before. Known today as the Night Watch, its name is a misnomer. The scene was not painted at night. The darkness was simply age and varnish, but the drama within it, the movement, the tension, made it unforgettable. This was no stiff parade of dignitaries. This was life, caught mid-motion. Musketeers marching, a captain raising his hand, a child bathed in golden light, every figure pulling the viewer deeper into the frame. It was a painting that breathed, that shifted under your gaze, as though it refused to sit still. Rembrandt had taken a civic militia portrait, a genre typically rigid and formal, and infused it with narrative. He blurred the line between history and imagination, turning a routine commission into an epic. The figures interact, overlap, emerge from shadow and stride into light. It is as if the viewer has stumbled into a story already in progress, yet even within its grandeur, the painting is grounded in detail. The curl of a feather, the gleam of a buckle, the tension in a man's jaw, each moment layered with meaning. Rembrandt did not just depict a watch. He created a moment of restless anticipation, a slice of time forever ready to move. When it was unveiled, it confused many. It did not flatter. It did not conform. But it changed everything. It showed what? A painting could be not a record, but a revelation. Not a pose, but a pulse. The Night Watch remains one of the most visited works of art in the world. Not because it is perfect, but because it lives. And in that living, it reminds us that stillness is never the absence of movement, but the presence of meaning. Bankruptcy and brilliance be the middle of his life. Rembrandt had known both acclaim and ruin. He was once a celebrated artist, wealthy and in demand. But time turned. His wife Saskia died young. Commissions slowed. His taste for collecting prints, curiosities, costumes for his models drained his finances. He borrowed, he lost. In 1656, Rembrandt declared bankruptcy. He sold his house, his possessions, even the printing press he had once used to etch scenes with the finest of lines. From the outside, it looked like decline, but inside, something quiet was taking shape. Something more enduring. In these years of hardship, Rembrandt painted not less, but more deeply. He turned inward. His subjects became fewer, but more profound. The aged, the wounded, the overlooked, they filled his canvases. He painted the return of the prodigal son with a tenderness that felt like prayer. He painted the apostles not as icons, but as men tired, uncertain, full of faith and doubt. There was no performance left in his work. Only presence, only truth. The brushwork grew looser, the colors richer, the light more compassionate. His vision, once wide, narrowed like a funnel until it reached the soul. These were not works for patrons or profit. These were offerings. In a world that often values only what shines, Rembrandt painted what was worn, what was broken, what still breathed quietly beneath the weight of loss. He died in 1669, buried in a rented grave. No monument marked the spot, but his art remains not as relics of a fallen master, but as mirrors of ourselves. They ask us not to look at greatness, but to recognize our own reflection in the soft places between light and shadow. Chapter 5. Van Gogh's Starry Burden. Long before the world admired Vincent van Gogh, before galleries whispered his name with reverence, he was simply a brother, a man held together by letters. To the world, he was a storm. But to Theo, he was Vincent. And that single connection may have been the only thread strong enough to hold him in place from the Dutch countryside to the heat of the south of France. Vincent wrote to Theo hundreds of letters, full of longing, gratitude, anguish, and insight. These weren't casual notes. They were confessions, observations, cries for help, and love, always love. Theo wasn't just a sibling. He was a sanctuary. In those pages, Vincent painted with words. The letters show us a man who felt too deeply for the world he lived in. A man whose pain was sharpened by beauty. A man who looked at a dying sunflower and saw life clinging to hope. Theo responded not with advice, but with belief. He supported Vincent financially, yes, but more importantly emotionally. He was patient, present, a quiet shore against the crashing tide. Without Theo, there would have been no Vincent. No starry night, no sunflowers. The bond between them was not just familial. It was vital. It was breath. And in a life filled with absence and rejection, that one connection remained fragile, yet unbreakable. Vincent's legacy lives in paint, but its heartbeat lives in ink. In those letters, the artist's voice is not tormented, but tender, not broken, but bare. Through Theo, we see the man behind the myth, and we feel the weight of love that never asked for anything in return. Brushstroke as breakdown to understand Van Gogh is to stand inside a storm. His canvases do not sit still, they shiver. They swirl. They ache. He painted not what was there, but what was felt. His skies twist like thoughts. His fields bend like moods. His stars blaze like burdens dot and arl. He found color like never before. The yellows of the wheat fields, the violet shadows of the olive trees, the deep blue of night, it was a palette of emotion. He painted quickly, as if trying to outrun the noise in his mind. Thick strokes, heavy textures. Every canvas carried urgency. Every brushstroke a heartbeat. He did not seek perfection. He sought release. The swaying cypresses, the restless skies, they weren't meant to be beautiful. They were meant to be honest. He once wrote, "Instead of trying to reproduce exactly what I have before my eyes, I use color more arbitrarily so as to express myself more forcefully. In Wheatfield with crows, the sky seems to low. The path doesn't lead anywhere. The birds black, urgent fly without rest. It is not a scene. It is a cry, but in that cry, there is clarity." Van Gogh's madness was not just illness. It was expression pushed beyond the boundary of control. The art was not separate from his suffering, it was stitched into it. Each brushstroke a breath. He couldn't take, a word he couldn't speak. We often call it genius. But it came at a cost. To paint like Van Gogh did is to carry too much, to feel too much. His breakdowns were not interruptions, they were part of the brush. The color of pain for Van Gogh, color was never just color. It was emotion, memory, spirit. Where others saw pigment, he saw feeling. And he used it like language, yellow, bright, insistent, full of yearning. He flooded the canvas with it. In sunflowers in lamplight, in glowing windows under midnight skies. Yellow was his hope, his longing for warmth, for connection, for joy. But it was never stable. It flickered. It pushed forward, then fell back. Even in joy, there was something anxious in his yellow, a fever more than a comfort. Then there was blue deep and solemn, the color of loneliness, of silence. He wrapped the night in it. painted rooms where shadows grew long, bodies hunched, over, stars distant, glowing like questions. In the starry night, the blue is not just the sky. It's the soul vast, churning, unknowable. These colors weren't chosen, they were felt. He once said, "The emotions are sometimes so strong that I work without knowing it." The strokes come like speech. He painted with contradictions. Joy laced with despair. Light twisted by shadow. Even his portraits seemed caught between two moods, somewhere between presence and departure. Van Gogh's colors is to step into a world that bleeds. A world where sorrow hums behind beauty, and every hue has a heartbeat. The canvas becomes not a window, but a mirror showing us how complex, how fragile, how human emotion truly is. A silence after madness in July of 1890, the noise inside. Van Gogh grew too loud. In a quiet field outside Auvers, he placed a revolver against his chest. He was just 37. For 2 days, he lingered. When Theo arrived, Vincent's first words were soft. "I hope I did it properly." He died in Theo's arms. There was no funeral with fanfare, no great recognition. Just wildflowers laid gently over his coffin, and a small group of mourners who knew his heart. But silence did not mean stillness. In the years that followed, the world caught up to what Vincent had already seen. His paintings, once unsold, misunderstood, bloomed. The night sky he painted became the sky we dream beneath. The sunflowers he loved became the flowers we give in joy and in grief. Theo died just months later. He could not live in a world without Vincent, but their bond endured. Today, they are buried side by side under a blanket of Ivy brothers reunited. The madness that once consumed Van Gogh has become myth. But in truth, it was not madness alone. It was vision. It was sensitivity without shield. It was brilliance that could not be quieted. His silence was not the end, it was the pause before legacy. Today, his art is everywhere. In books, in homes, in hearts. We do not look at his paintings, we feel them. They do not age. They do not fade. They remind us that beauty and sorrow are often the same thing, just seen through different light. And when we stand before the starry night, or irises, or wheat field with crows, we are not just looking at paint. We are hearing Vincent's final whisper. I felt it. I saw it. I loved it even when it hurt. Chapter 6, Picasso's Many Faces. Before the world called him a genius, before galleries bowed to his name, Pablo Picasso lived in shades of sorrow. At the turn of the century, in the chilly corners of Paris, he was a young man draped in loneliness. His blue period, stretching from 1901 to 1904, wasn't just a style, it was a season of grief. His friend Carlos Casagemas had taken his own life. The loss echoed through Picasso's canvas like a cold wind. He painted blind beggars, hunched mothers, aging souls wrapped in silence. His palette dimmed to the color of mourning. The world turned blue, not just in hue, but in spirit, yet even. In despair, he found rhythm. These early works did not shout. They whispered. Their stillness invited reflection. And in this quiet pain, Picasso discovered empathy, a deep understanding of suffering that would return in many forms throughout his life. Then came a shift. The blue period melted into the rose period. The world warmed. Clowns appeared. Dancers. lovers. There was pink in his cheeks and joy in his lines. He wasn't healed, not fully, but he was moving. This journey through mood and color was not random. It was personal. Picasso painted not just the world he saw, but the one he felt. His art was not fixed. It evolved with his inner tide. And in this emotional current, we glimpse the first signs of a man who would never stay still when faces shatter red. To understand Cubism is not to explain it, but to experience it. When Picasso and Georges Braque broke the world into pieces, they weren't destroying it, they were revealing it. They fractured form to find deeper meaning. Around 1907, Picasso painted Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. 5 women, angular, confrontational, their bodies sliced by geometry, their eyes distant, unblinking. It was unlike anything before. The rules of Renaissance perspective gone, the illusion of depth shattered. Instead, he gave us many angles at once, like a memory unfolding in fragments. Cubism emerged from this rupture. With Braque, Picasso explored objects as if they were puzzles, instruments, bottles, faces all turned, flattened, twisted, reassembled. It was not meant to confuse, but to offer truth. A guitar isn't only one shape. A face isn't only one feeling. The world is not a single point of view. This was art made of echoes, of glances, of sensations layered over time. It required us not just to look, but to think, to slow down, to see beyond the surface. Many were startled. Some dismissed it, but it changed everything. Cubism became a cornerstone of modern art, not because it was strange, but because it was honest. Life is never just one angle. Picasso's faces did not break. They opened. They offered the possibility that identity is not one thing, but many. Seen from within, from without, from all at once. In this, he wasn't just painting form. He was painting the complexity of being. Guernica's Screamin', 1937, war cast its shadow across Spain. Planes descended on the quiet town of Guernica. The bombing was swift, brutal, and left hundreds dead. It was not a battlefield. It was a market square. When Picasso heard of the atrocity, he did not reach for color. He reached for black, for white, for gray. In these tones, he created Guernica, a mural nearly 25 feet wide and over 11 feet tall. But its size was not what stunned the world. It was its silence and its scream. There are no flames in Guernica, no soldiers. Yet the horror is unmistakable. A horse writhes. A woman howls with her dead child in her arms. A fallen soldier lies shattered, his sword broken, his hope gone. Above, a single light bulb glares, part eye, part bomb, part judgment. The painting does not offer answers. It does not soothe. It confronts. It reminds us that pain cannot always be narrated. Sometimes it must be felt. Picasso never returned to Spain after Franco's rise. Guernica became his voice of protest. It toured the world, a canvas without borders, warning of violence and the cost of forgetting. Today, it hangs in Madrid, though it once remained in exile, kept from Spain until democracy returned. It is more than a painting. It is a memory, carved in shadow, a monument to anguish, a cry that never quiets. In Guernica, Picasso painted war, not as a glory, but as a wound. And in that wound, the century saw its reflection, the man behind the mythby, the time he grew old. Picasso was more than an artist. He was a symbol, a titan, a headline. But beneath the layers of fame and ferocity, there still lived the boy from Malaga who once sketched bulls on scraps of paper. His studios were filled with life canvases stacked, brushes worn, scraps of ideas fluttering like birds. He rose early, worked endlessly, always reaching. There was never enough time, never enough paint. Even at 90, he created with the urgency of youth, but behind the drive was something tender. He kept old letters, childhood drawings. He never stopped sketching animals, owls, horses, dogs, with the simplicity of a boy who loved the living world. For all his abstraction, there was a deep appreciation for the primal, the instinctual, the human. He once said, "It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child." In that sentence lives his secret. He never stopped chasing wonder, never stopped questioning. Yes, he was difficult. Yes, he was proud. But he was also endlessly curious. About faces, about forms, about love, about loss. The myth of Picasso is large. But the man at heart was still drawing dreams in the corners of his notebooks. When he died in 1973, the world mourned. But his spirit did not vanish. It lives in the shattered lines, in the quiet bulls, in the painted cries, and the dancing harlequins. It lives in the belief that art can be wild, strange, broken, and still, somehow, deeply human. Chapter 7. Monet and the Breath of Water. In the quiet countryside of Giverny, Claude Monet stood alone in a field. The wind moved gently through the tall grasses, whispering across the landscape like a secret only he could hear. Before him stood a simple haystack, silent, unmoving, and yet endlessly changing in his eyes. Monet returned here again and again, day after day, canvas after canvas, chasing something no one else could see till most. The haystack was just that, a mound of straw beneath the sun. But to Monet, it was a living mirror of light. Morning mist would blur its edges. Noon sun would crown it in gold. Evening shadow would sink it into violet and blue. The haystack itself never changed, but the world around it danced, flickered, breathed. And Monet, brush in hand, was determined to capture that breath. He did not paint from imagination. He painted from presence, the soft presence of now. As the light changed, he changed with it. Sometimes he would paint the same subject 10, 20, 30 times, the only difference being the time of day, the season, the atmosphere. These were not just paintings. They were meditations. Patience was his palette. He waited for the exact moment. The light curved just right. The shadows stretched just enough. Each stroke was deliberate, quiet, like footsteps through fog dot in his series of haystacks. Viewers don't just see the fields, they feel the time passing. The air shifts. The warmth of morning gives way to the cool breath of dusk. The stillness is not empty, but full of attention. And in this rhythm, Monet taught the world how to see. What he gave us was not just scenery, it was an invitation to slow down, to notice, to be still. He made the ordinary sacred, not by changing it, but by honoring it. In that field of hay, Monet found ours folded into gold. And through his eyes, we do too, a garden grown in grief years past, and Monet's brush grew. Slower, but his spirit deeper. After the death of his beloved wife Camille, and later his son Jean, his world narrowed. And in that quiet space of mourning, he created a garden not just of flowers, but of healing. The garden at Giverny bloomed under his care like a living canvas. He shaped the land, dug the pond, and planted the lilies himself. Willow trees wept at the water's edge, bamboo rustled softly in the breeze, and water lilies floated like thoughts drifting across the mind. This was not a garden for show. It was a refuge, a sanctuary. And soon, it became the heart of his final and greatest. Workless nymphas, the water lilies, each canvas stretched wide and low, like windows into serenity. He no longer cared about the edges. No borders, no horizon line. Just water and sky, reflection and ripple. The lilies, pale and soft, floated in silence. Above them, the sky reflected clouds and sun and trees, all blurring into water, all. Dissolving into light dot in these paintings, we feel something deeper than beauty. We feel release, pain melting into peace. He once wrote that he was pursuing the impossible, but in truth, he was making peace with what he could not hold. The people he lost, the years that slipped away, in the water's soft shimmer. He let it all go. These works hang in hushed galleries now, some in curved rooms built just for them. Visitors fall silent as they step inside. Time slows. It's not just art, it's atmosphere. You don't look at a water lily painting. You breathe it in. Monet never gave names like grief or healing to these works. He simply painted what he saw and what he felt. And through his grief, he gave the world a vision of stillness, of quiet color, of light that does not hurt, but heals. Impressions of a morning long before the lilies, long before Giverny, there was a harbor at sunrise. A misty morning in Le Havre, where Monet painted a small canvas titled Impression. Sunrise, orange light broke through a blue-gray sky. Boats floated in soft outlines, and the sun hung like a glowing ember above the sea. The strokes were loose, almost unfinished. The water shimmered without detail. It was not a painting of the harbor, it was a painting of a feeling. When he showed it in 1874, critics were confused and many were cruel. One reviewer mocked the painting's title, calling it nothing more than an impression. The term was meant to dismiss it, to call it incomplete, sloppy, vague. But Monet and his fellow painters took that insult and wore it like a badge. They were not trying to paint the world as it was. They were trying to paint how it felt fleeting, changing, alive. Thus, Impressionism was born. At the time, it was radical, bold, misunderstood. These artists were not celebrated. They were laughed at, but they kept painting, kept chasing the light. And slowly, the world caught up. Today, Impression, sunrise hangs in the Musée Marmottan in Paris. One of the most beloved works in the world. What Monet captured was not just a sunrise. It was a new way of seeing, a new morning for art, for emotion, for the eye. He reminded us that a moment does not have to be perfect to be real, that beauty can be brief and still be whole. Through his brush, he taught us to notice the softness in beginnings, the shimmer of light on water, the warmth of orange as it cuts through gray. It's not just a painting. It's a breath when vision fattest time, like light, cannot be held. And Monet, the painter of light, eventually began to lose it. In his later years, cataracts clouded his eyes. What was once sharp and shimmering turned dull, murky, distorted, but he kept painting. He knew the colors only by memory. He squinted, leaned in close, followed shapes by instinct. His blues turned muddy. His reds deepened. The world blurred in, yet somehow his work became even more dreamlike. The water lilies from this time stretch across panels like sighs. The detail is gone, but the feeling remains. Sometimes even stronger. There is something humbling in these late works, a softness that knows its limits and embraces them. He refused surgery for many years. He feared the change, feared seeing the world too sharply, losing the dream he had learned to paint through. Eventually, he did undergo treatment. His vision improved slightly, but the damage was done. Yet he did not mourn the loss. He adapted. He adjusted. He accepted dot in these final works. The line between sky and water disappears completely. The canvas becomes a place of pure feeling, pure presence. There is no subject, no scene, only light, color, motion. And when Monet finally put down his brush, it was not in defeat. It was in surrender, a gentle one, a closing of the eyes, not in darkness, but in peace. Through blindness, he taught us how to see differently, not through detail, but through emotion, through memory, through trust. In the end, Monet gave us more than images. He gave us a language of light, a way to witness the world not just with our eyes, but with our breath. Chapter 8, Raphael's Divine Geometry. In the heart of the Vatican, sunlight filtered softly across a high, vaulted room. The walls were ancient stone, the air cool and hushed. But it was not silence that filled the chamber. It was thought. It was presence. It was Raphael, his fresco. The school of Athens rested like a crown jewel across one wall, vast, intricate, and alive. At first glance, it seemed like a congregation of philosophers. But look longer, and it became something greater, a cathedral of minds, a painting that held centuries of wisdom in stillness, Plato pointing to the heavens, Aristotle gesturing to the earth. Their robes flowed with motion, yet their faces held eternity. Pythagoras scribbled, Euclid measured, and Socrates questioned with raised fingers. Even Zoroaster and Ptolemy shared the same painted floor. Raphael was only in his 20s when he created this. Young, but wise beyond his years. He did not just paint people, he painted a conversation that had been happening for millennia. He gave it space. He gave it grace, and in the shadows of the crowd, he hid a self-portrait. A gentle, observing figure with a soft, oval face, the only one looking directly out at us. Not as a boast, but as a whisper. I was here, it said. I listened. What made the school of Athens divine was not only its technique, though it was flawless. It was the balance of intellect and humility. Raphael placed the greatest minds of Western history in harmony, not in conflict, not in chaos, but as if they were instruments in a single orchestra, each playing in time. IT was geometry, philosophy, poetry, and humanism all composed into a fresco that felt as light as air. Yet as deep as time itself, the Madonnas of light, where others saw the Virgin Mary as a symbol, Raphael saw a woman. Not a queen on a throne or a saint behind glass, but a mother tender, present, an infinitely gentle dot in his Madonnas. The sacred became familiar. Mary is often seated in quiet meadows, holding her child with such ease that the canvas feels like it breathes. There is no strain in her posture, no fear in her eyes, only a calmness that seems to slow the world. One of his most famous works, the Sistine Madonna, places Mary in a sea of clouds. She steps forward with the Christ child in her arms. The curtains part behind her. Her gaze does not reach the heavens or the earth, but rather a soft, wide knowing, as if she already understands every joy and every sorrow we carry. Beside her, the two cherubs lean on their elbows, looking up with the relaxed boredom of children waiting to go home. This playfulness makes the scene even more human. Even the angels seem to understand the everyday dot in Madonna of the Goldfinch. The infant Christ plays gently with a small bird, while the young John the Baptist looks on. Mary, seated in the middle, is grounded, one hand on Christ, the other on John. Her touch holds the future, but her expression holds only love. There is warmth in every fold of the cloth, every tilt of the head, every soft shadow. Raphael painted light not as a tool, but as a presence. It falls across skin and stone not to highlight, but to bless. His Madonnas do not declare holiness. They invite it. They do not demand reverence. They earn it through silence, through balance, through the beauty of the ordinary made divine, symmetry. In the soul, if Michelangelo was power and Leonardo was mystery, then Raphael was balance. Not just in form, but in feeling. He painted like a poet who preferred clarity to flourish. Every line had purpose. Every color had pieced out in Raphael's world. Geometry was not cold. It was sacred. Circles, triangles, pyramids these were. Not just tools of structure, but windows into harmony. He believed that beauty was not something loud or excessive. It was something that felt right, like a song finishing on its last note, or a breath released after being held. His composition was often centered and calm. Figures flowed in graceful arcs, not jagged diagonals. Movement was implied, not shouted. And yet, nothing was static. There was always life, just quiet, settled life. Raphael's use of color was gentle but confident. Blues, reds, and ochres were laid with restraint, allowing the eye to rest rather than race. He painted skin that felt soft, drapery that seemed to rustle, and faces that carried thought without speaking a word. Even in crowded scenes such as the disputation of the Holy Sacrament, there was no confusion. Heaven and earth coexisted in a single frame, one above the other, linked by gazes, gestures, and golden light. He was never afraid of space. He gave every figure room to breathe, and in that breath was soul. Raphael understood that symmetry was not just visual, it was emotional. A painting should feel centered not just in its layout, but in its heart. It should bring a viewer into stillness, into ease. This is why his works have remained beloved, not only by scholars, but by those who simply stop and stare. They offer rest not just for the eyes, but for the spirit, a life cut like marble. Raphael died on his birthday, April 6th, at just 37 years old. The cause was sudden illness, perhaps fever. Some say he worked too much. Others whisper of overexertion in love. But the truth is quiet, like his art. He simply did not stay long, and yet what he left behind was timeless. When he passed, Rome mourned him not as a man, but as a treasure. His funeral was held at the Pantheon, a place where gods had once been honored. And Raphael, in his quiet way, had painted humanity so well that he was buried among them. His tomb bore a Latin inscription, "Here lies Raphael," by whom nature feared to be outdone while he lived, and when he died, feared she too would die. It was not flattery. It was belief. He had captured the world not as it was, but as it could become, beautiful, whole. Even Michelangelo, often critical of others, had called Raphael's art graceful beyond nature, and yet Raphael never boasted. He was not driven by fame or fury. He was driven by harmony, a desire to make the divine visible. Not loud, his studio was open, his assistants many. He welcomed ideas, collaborated freely, and never carved a legend out of pain. He was a Renaissance artist without torment. And that, perhaps, is what made him divine. Today, his works live in silence. They hang in halls, in cathedrals, in books and screens. They do not demand your attention, but they reward it, and when you stand before one, perhaps the School of Athens, or a Madonna nestled in a museum corner, you feel it. The symmetry, the soul, the warmth of a man who saw art not as a weapon or a cry, but as a prayer whispered in geometry. Chapter 9. Caravaggio's Sacred Violence. Rome at the end of the 16th century was a city of noise. In contrast, golden palaces next to muddy alleys, whispers of saints above the cries of the hungry. And it was in this city, between stone walls and lamplight, that Caravaggio painted not from imagination, but from the living world around him. He didn't choose royalty or trained models. He walked the streets. He watched beggars sleeping near churches, gamblers huddled over cards, and women leaning in the doorways of taverns. These were his muses. His studio was wherever light met dirt. When he painted the Virgin Mary, he used a woman from the brothel. When he painted John the Baptist, the boy had dirty feet. His apostles had cracked nails and weathered eyes. These weren't polished saints, they were people pulled from the crowd, full of bruises, sweat, and hunger, but somehow, in Caravaggio's hands, they became holy. The folds of their clothing held dust, not gold. Their expressions were raw, not rehearsed. And still, they glowed not with halos, but with presence. He painted them as they were, and by doing so, lifted them. The sacred, he seemed to say, was not above us. It was among us, in us, a loaf of bread on a table, a calloused hand gripping a coin, a glance between two tired eyes. Caravaggio made these moments feel eternal. He made poverty sacred. He made suffering visible. He didn't paint ideas. He painted encounters. And in his canvas, the divine was no longer a faraway perfection. It was flesh and bone, standing in the streetlight. Murder and mercy. Caravaggio's paintings were confrontations. They didn't decorate walls, they challenged them. Step in front of one, and it felt like stepping into a scene moments after. Impact. You could almost hear the breath, the tension, the silence that follows a scream. Take the martyrdom of Saint Matthew. The killer's blade is mid-swing. Saint Matthew, already falling, reaches up not in defense, but almost in blessing. The crowd recoils. A boy runs. There is no distance between the viewer and the violence. You are there, a witness, or Judith beheading Holofernes. Judith's arm is tense, her grip steady. Blood streams across white sheets. But look closer. Her face holds not fury, but horror. She has done what she must, but she cannot unsee it. Even the execution feels human. This was Caravaggio's paradox. His scenes were brutal, but not without grace. He painted violence not as spectacle, but as consequence. Every act of harm carried a shadow of mercy. Every saint bore the dirt of. Their path dot in the incredulity of St. Thomas. Christ invites a doubter to touch his wound. The gesture is tender, intimate. Thomas pushes a finger into the torn side. And Jesus, instead of pulling away, stands calmly. The divine allows doubt. The sacred opens its scar. Caravaggio had seen violence and life in the streets in himself. He knew how quickly anger could spark, how fragile peace could be. And in his art, he did not pretend otherwise. But he also believed that light could still fall on the broken, that even the worst moments could hold redemption. His saints were not symbols. They were survivors, light that fell like judgment. Caravaggio's genius was not just in subject, it was in how he used light. To him, it wasn't background decoration. It was voice. It was command. It was divine. His style, later called chiaroscuro, means light dark, but in his work, it meant more than contrast. It meant revelation, illumination, judgment. He didn't use gentle glows or soft transitions. He painted scenes swallowed in black until, suddenly, a beam would break through, like a curtain pulled aside, like a moment of truth that could not be unseen. Dot in the calling of St. Matthew, a ray of light cuts across the room, striking the face of a man at a table. Christ is barely visible at the edge, his hand pointing. But the light does what the voice does not. It names the chosen. Matthew, stunned, touches his chest. Me? It's not just beautiful, it's biblical. The light moves like grace. It reveals, it isolates, it convicts. Even in the conversion of St. Paul, the light doesn't fall on a face. It falls on the ground, where Paul lies blind, his body sprawled beneath the hooves of a horse. The divine doesn't shine on victory. It shines on collapse, on surrender. Caravaggio painted light as if it had intent, as if heaven itself had broken into the scene, not to decorate it, but to transform it. This was not the sunlight of landscapes. It was the sharp, cold light of vision, a kind of seeing that left no hiding place. And yet, it didn't always punish. Sometimes it forgave. Sometimes it healed. Darkness in Caravaggio's work was not evil. It was honest. It was the world we lived in. But light that piercing, focused light was the interruption. The miracle, he made shadows deeper to make the light matter. The runaway genius in 1606. Caravaggio killed a man. The details are blurred, a fight over a woman, or a game, or an insult. But the result was simple. Blood spilled in the street. And Caravaggio ran. From Rome, from judgment, from the life he had built, he was exiled, a fugitive. And yet, he painted more urgently than ever Dot in Naples, in Malta, in Sicily. He worked fast. Each piece held more tension, more pain, as if he knew time was chasing him. As if each canvas was both confession and plea, David with the head of Goliath is haunting. The young David does not smile. He looks at the severed head, Caravaggio's own face, painted as Goliath with a gaze full of sorrow. Mercy, not triumph. It is the killer begging himself for forgiveness. In the 7 works of mercy, he layered kindness into chaos, feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, all in one cramped, bustling frame. It was a painting of grace under pressure, of light breaking through panic. Caravaggio lived in shadows, not just on canvas, but in soul. He was praised by patrons and hunted by law. He walked with a sword. He drank too much. He fought too often. And yet, through all of it, he kept painting, each work more stripped, more human, more urgent. Then in 1610, at just 38 years old, he died, possibly poisoned, possibly fevered, alone on a beach, waiting for a pardon that never came. He left no children, no letters, only paint, only works that still breathe. Today, his paintings hang in quiet rooms, and people stand before them, silent, drawn, and not just by the drama, but by the truth. Caravaggio did not give answers. He gave us a mirror. In every face he painted, there is a trace of our own. Flawed, frightened, forgiven, his genius was. Not in hiding pain, it was in honoring it. And through the dust, through the blood, through the shadows, there was always a beam of light. Chapter 10. Vermeer's silent rooms. She doesn't speak. She doesn't move. She simply looks as if something or someone has just called her name. Her lips are parted, her head gently turned. Her eyes meet ours, and we're caught. The girl with a pearl earring is one of the most famous paintings in the world. And yet, it holds no crown, no sword, no grand gesture. Just a girl in a blue and gold turban, wearing a large pearl that glows against the shadow of her neck. She is unnamed, unclaimed by history, but her presence is undeniable. She isn't a queen or a myth. She is a question, elegant, quiet, unresolved. Vermeer didn't paint her as part of a scene. There's no furniture, no walls, no distraction. Just her, suspended in stillness. And in that stillness is all the power. The brushwork is soft. The background is dark. But the light, that perfect northern light, touches her skin like morning. It lingers on the pearl, which may not even be real. It glides across her cheek, her lips, her gaze. There's a sense that something is about to happen. Or just happened. Or perhaps nothing will happen at all. That's the mystery. This painting doesn't tell a story. It invites us into one. And like a quiet breath before words, it lingers in silence, timeless, delicate, alive. The music of stillness. Vermeer's rooms were not grand halls. They were small, domestic, and ordinary. But inside them, something miraculous occurred. Time paused. A woman pours milk into a bowl. Another writes a letter, her hand gently hovering above the page. One girl tunes a lute. Another gazes out a window While holding a balance scale, each scene is simple. But the quiet is so deep, so sincere, that it begins to feel like music, the kind that needs no sound dot in the milkmaid. We see a woman mid-task, pouring with care. Her face is calm, her sleeves rolled. The bread on the table is crusted and real. The walls are worn. A brass container glints with light. Yet there is no rush in her motion. Just intention. Just presence. Vermeer's genius was knowing that life doesn't always need a climax to be meaningful. He didn't chase action. He painted attention, a kind of deep seeing. Woman holding a balance shows a lady in blue, standing still, weighing gold on a small scale. Behind her is a painting of the Last Judgment. In her hands, she holds quiet power, not through force, but through poise. It's a meditation, a moment of weighing not just coins, but choices. Vermeer painted women with respect. They are not symbols or background figures. They are thinkers, readers, musicians, centered, graceful, aware. Each canvas is a moment before or after something. It breathes. It waits, and we as viewers slow down. We watch longer. We listen to the silence between acts. In Vermeer's world, stillness is not empty. It is full of thought, of light, of time, a window to light in Vermeer's paintings. Light always enters from the left. It slips through an unseen window and drapes across the room, like a gentle hand brushing over the scene. It touches faces, fabrics, glassware illuminating without announcing itself. This light is not decoration. It's a character, dot and woman. Reading a letter, the subject stands close to the window, the paper glowing in her hands. The curtain behind her is pushed aside, as if someone has just looked in or out. We don't know what the letter says, but we feel its weight because of how the light holds her. Vermeer's light is tender. It's patient. It doesn't flood or blind. It reveals even in the lacemaker, where the scene is so tightly focused. The soft light brings attention to the tiny threads, the bowed head, the quiet concentration. It wraps the room in warmth, yet never draws attention to itself. He used this light like a whisper, guiding the viewer gently, like a lullaby of vision. The northern Dutch light, often cool, often clear, entered his studio and became the soul of his work. He didn't paint dramatic sunsets or dazzling displays. He captured the way sunlight actually moves across a room at midday. The kind of light we live with, not dream about. A tea turned ordinary life into something radiant. Vermeer seemed to understand that what we remember most in life isn't always noise or spectacle. Sometimes it's the afternoon light on a wall, a shadow moving across the floor, a glass of water catching the sun, and he made that enough obscurity and radiance in his lifetime. Vermeer was not famous. He lived in Delft, a quiet Dutch town, and worked slowly. He painted only a few pieces each year, sometimes less. His family was large. Money was tight. His patrons were few. He died in debt, and then, for nearly 2 centuries, the world forgot him. His paintings were misattributed, overlooked, or hidden in private collections. For a long time, Girl with the Pearl Earring was thought to be by someone else. His name faded into the background of art history, but slowly, quietly, the light returned. In the 19th century, scholars began to notice something strange. In museum corners, small domestic scenes glowed with an unmatched softness. No one painted quite like this, so restrained, so pure. A handful of signatures revealed the name. Johannes Vermeer. His rediscovery was not loud. It was reverent. Curators began to reassemble his legacy, one piece at a time. A pattern emerged. The window to the left, the quiet women, the still rooms, the glowing surfaces, and now, centuries after his death, Vermeer is beloved. Not for volume, he left fewer than 40 confirmed works, but for vision. He showed that art didn't have to shout to be heard, that smallness could hold wonder, that silence could speak. Today, people travel across oceans to see his paintings. They stand in quiet galleries and do what his subjects did: read, write, pour, wait, listen. They feel the hush. They see the light. And they understand Vermeer's greatness was never about drama. It was about attention to life, to light, to the beauty of moments that most people miss. His rooms remain forever still. His subjects never age. His light never fades, and somewhere in that stillness, time itself pauses just long enough for us to feel something eternal. Chapter 11. Goya and the Ghosts of Empire. At first glance, Francisco Goya's early paintings shimmer with formality, elegant figures in silk, noblemen in powdered wigs, queens seated with quiet dignity. The court of Spain in the late 1700s was a world of spectacle, ceremony, and control. And Goya, the royal portraitist, stood with a brush between flattery and truth. He had risen through the ranks not by birth, but by talent. From his early years painting frescoes in chapels, too, becoming a favorite of Spain's powerful elite, Goya earned his place with discipline and sharp perception. He watched closely. He listened, but Goya did not paint fantasy. Even when asked to capture kings and queens, he painted them as they were. Not grander, not sweeter, just human. In his portrait of King Charles IV and his family, the composition echoes the majesty of Velázquez. But look longer. There is something strange. The royal figures stand stiffly, their expressions almost awkward. The queen appears dominant, the king slightly absent. Their children and attendants seem uneasy. Their wealth heavy on their bodies but not in their eyes. This was no flattery. It was a mirror polished but honest. Goya showed the cracks beneath the crown. Even his private sketches from this time reveal discomfort. Satirical drawings of the nobility. Quiet studies of peasants and beggars. While he stood in marble halls, his gaze wandered to the edges. He understood that a kingdom could dress itself in gold and still be rotting from within. In many ways, Goya was the last great court painter and the first modern one. He didn't just show power. He questioned it. The 3rd of May in 1808, Napoleon's army marched into Spain. A T-first. The French arrival was called an alliance. But soon the streets of Madrid ran red. On May 2nd, Spanish citizens rose up against the occupiers. On May 3rd, the retaliation came. French soldiers lined up civilians and shot them by lantern light. Years later, Goya painted the moment. Not with glory, not with balance, but with horror. The 3rd of May 1808 is unlike anything that came before. In the dark under a cold sky, a man in a white shirt stretches out his arms. His face twisted in fear, his body lit like a beacon. Behind him, the dead lie in a heap. Before him, faceless soldiers aim their rifles. There is no justice in the scene. No heroism. Only the quiet build up to a scream. The man's hands are open. One bears around a mark that echoes Christ's. But this is no religious painting. It is political. It is personal. It is a witness to pain. Goya didn't hide the blood. He didn't clean the terror. He painted it as it was stark, unfiltered, and unbearable. The painting doesn't tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end. It freezes a single, irreversible moment, a breath before death, a light before it fades. It became one of the first true anti-war paintings in history, not a celebration of battle, but a condemnation of its cost. Even now, over 2 centuries later, its silence is deafening. The sleep of reason as Spain's politics crumbled, so too did Goya's illusions. By the turn of the 19th century, the Enlightenment ideals he once believed were fading. Injustice remained. Superstition returned. Fear replaced thought, and so Goya turned inward. He created Los Caprichos, a series of etchings full of shadows and strange figures. These were not scenes of real life. They were visions, allegories, nightmares pulled from waking minds. In one of the most famous, the sleep of reason produces monsters. A man slumps at his desk, head in his arms. Around him swarm bats, owls, and creatures with wide, staring eyes. It's not clear if he's asleep or simply overwhelmed. The message is quiet but firm. When reason sleeps, monsters wake. These prints weren't made for beauty. They were made for truth. Through them, Goya mocked the powerful, exposed corruption, and portrayed the absurdity of human cruelty. A man rides a donkey backwards. A priest bribes a demon. Women fly on broomsticks, not in magic, but in madness. Goya didn't invent these ideas. He simply revealed them. His monsters weren't from folklore. They were born of pride, ignorance, and fear. The technique of the etchings was delicate, but the emotion behind them was raw. In these small, dark images, Goya offered something rare, not entertainment, but confrontation. He showed us the things we pretend not to see, and perhaps most haunting of all, he did it without raising his voice. Blind but not silent sometime in his mid-40s, Goya fell seriously ill. The fever passed, but it left something behind. Deafness. The court painter who once listened to whispers, who lived by music and ceremony, now heard nothing. The silence was not chosen. It was sudden, permanent, and yet, in this silence, Goya began to hear something else, something deeper. His art shifted. He moved away from portraits and prints. He painted more privately, more darkly. In a small country home outside Madrid, known as the Quinta del Sordo, the house of the deaf man, Goya covered the walls with images that no one had commissioned. They were not for display. They were not for sale. They were for him. These are now known as the Black Paintings, and they are among the most haunting works in all of Western art. Saturn devouring his son shows a wild-eyed god eating the body of his own child, torn and limp. The witch's Sabbath features twisted, frightened faces gathered around a horned figure. In two old men, one figure leans forward, shouting or laughing or howling. It's hard to tell which. The colors are earth and shadow. The brushwork is rough, almost violent. There is no light, no peace, but there is truth. Goya, now an exile from the world he once knew, was painting what history often hides: the fear, the rage, the decay beneath the surface. He wasn't blind, but the darkness he saw was inward. And even though he could no longer hear a single sound, his paintings shouted what words could not. They remain honest in a way that few works dare to be, not crafted for beauty, but for reality. He painted what it felt like to live through collapse, and in doing so, he gave form to the ghosts of an empire that had lost its way. Chapter 12, Manet and the Edge of Modernity. In 1863, inside the soft-lit walls of the Salon des Refus, as a gallery created for rejected works, a painting hung that seemed to do more than just surprise. It disrupted. It offended. It challenged. An entire tradition with quiet boldness. The canvas was large. The scene was simple. A picnic in a clearing. Two fully dressed men sit casually on the grass. Between them, a woman entirely nude looks directly at the viewer. In the background, another woman, partially clothed, bathes in a stream. The painting was called Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, the luncheon on the grass. And it was by a 31-year-old artist named Edouard Manet. The scandal wasn't about nudity itself. Art had long featured nudes, often drawn from mythology or distant history. But Manet offered no such excuse. This was no Venus, no allegory. This was a real woman, a contemporary woman, sitting with real men, without apology or pretense. Her gaze was not coy or distant. It was direct, present, aware. The critics were harsh. They called it vulgar, clumsy, disrespectful to tradition. But something in the painting refused to be dismissed. Manet had stripped away illusion. The brushstrokes were visible, confident. The light was flat, not dramatic. The background almost unfinished. The contrast between the figures and the air. Setting created unease but also attention. He wasn't painting to flatter. He was painting to reveal. With this one canvas, Manet had broken the comfortable frame of art as it was known. And though many didn't know it yet, something new had begun, something modern. Olympia's defiance 2 years later, in 1865, Manet returned to the Salon, this time not in rejection, but full exhibition. He unveiled Olympia, and the uproar began again. A woman lies reclined on white sheets. She is nude, propped on pillows, her hand resting across her hip. She looks at the viewer, not inviting, not ashamed, just aware. Behind her, a black maid brings a bouquet of flowers. A black cat, arched and alert, sits at the foot of the bed. Once again, the art world froze. Olympia wasn't a goddess. She was a sex worker. Her pose mimicked Titian's Venus of Urbino, but without the softness. The background wasn't a dream. It was a room, real, unembellished. Her stare was unflinching. She knew she was being looked at, and she looked back. Critics called her grotesque, her body too angular, her skin too pale, her face too knowing. But beneath the outrage, something powerful stirred. Manet had replaced myth with presence. He'd taken a tradition of objectified beauty and returned the subject her agency. The flowers, the jewels, the servant, they all suggested that this woman was not a fantasy, but a person, in control of herself, in control of the moment. Manet didn't try to moralize. He didn't hide discomfort. He simply showed what was, and in doing so, Olympia became one of the most radical paintings of its time, not because of what it revealed, but because of who refused to turn away. Paris in flux in the years that followed. Manet's work moved with the rhythm of a city in transformation. Paris was changing. The old medieval streets were being torn down. Wide boulevards replaced narrow alleys. Steam trains cut through neighborhoods. Iron bridges, street lamps, and glass storefronts rose like new bones beneath the city's skin. Manet didn't paint the city as a postcard. He painted its shift, its blur, its edges dot in the railway. A young girl gazes through iron bars at a cloud of steam, while a woman beside her sits with an open book, her face half turned. The painting is fragmented, momentary, like a snapshot of something between thoughts. In a bar at the Foliesberg Ray, a barmaid stands behind a crowded counter. Her eyes are distant, her posture weary. Reflections twist behind her bottles, guests, chandeliers, and a man just out of frame. The mirror both reveals and distorts, creating a sense of loneliness. Even in the crowd, Manet captured modern life not as theater, but as reality. The fashion, the boredom, the crowd, the space between people, even when they stood side by side. He painted people at cafes, in music halls, leaning on balconies, crossing streets. Faces lit by gaslight, figures caught mid-step. The surface of things and what lay just underneath. Paris in Manet's world was not always beautiful, but it was alive, and he was one of its most attentive observers, painter of transition to art. Manet lived at the threshold of something larger than himself. He had studied the old masters. He admired Velázquez and Goya. He understood composition, anatomy, shadow, and line. But he also knew that the world was moving, fast, loud, changing not just in form, but in feeling. Manet stood with one foot in the traditions of realism, painting what was seen, and the other edging toward impressionism, painting how things felt. His brush grew looser, his colors more vibrant. He painted less in the studio, more from life. Scenes became shorter, lighter, closer to the moment, and yet he remained distinct. While Monet and Renoir softened forms into light and color, Manet kept his edges. His lines still held clarity. His figures remained defined. He bridged the old and the new, the seen and the sensed. Manet didn't declare a movement. He didn't ask to be called modern, but modernity happened through him. He painted not to please, but to witness. Not to escape, but to confront, even as illness took hold later in life, as pain slowed his hand and shadowed his days. He painted roses, soft, glowing roses, small, quiet things, but full of presence, full of light. When he died in 1883, many still argued over his place. Was he classical or radical? Skilled or sloppy? Genius or provocateur? But history would decide. And it did today. Manet is seen as one of the founders of modern art, not because he set out to be, but because he painted as if the world could no longer lie, and in a time of masks and mirrors, he gave us the truth. Chapter 13, Pollock and the Dance of Chaos. The barn was quiet, but something electric hung in the air, a kind of waiting. Sunlight filtered through its wooden slats, casting soft beams across the dust that hovered like breath. In the middle of the floor, not on an easel or wall, lay an enormous canvas. It did not wait for a brush, nor for a stroke of intention in the traditional sense. It waited for motion for Jackson Pollock. He didn't walk into a room to paint. He entered it like a storm about to break. Cigarette in hand, shoes scuffed and shirt loose, he circled the canvas like a predator. But this wasn't fury. It was something more fragile, urgency wrapped in silence. Pollock didn't see the floor as limitation. He saw it as liberation. To him, the act of painting wasn't about placement, but presence. He used sticks and hardened brushes, even turkey basters, to sling and drip industrial paint in long, rhythmic arcs. The floor was his stage, and movement was his language. Every gesture was part of a private ritual, one that transformed the very nature of painting. He didn't just apply paint. He danced with it. The arcs were not random. They followed a kind of inner choreography that only he seemed to understand. And in that choreography was a wild sort of grace. Sometimes he'd work late into the night, the soft scrape of his shoes on the wooden floor, punctuated by the hiss of paint striking canvas. No sketches, no outlines, just motion. Pollock believed that every mark had to be authentic, that even hesitation was a form of dishonesty. In this process, the paint became more than pigment. It became memory, reaction, emotion the unseen made visible. When drips became thunder, Pollock's art didn't arrive quietly. It detonated. In the post-war years, as America searched for meaning and identity, his canvases emerged like primal echoes from a collective subconscious. He wasn't just painting lines. He was expressing a rawness that words couldn't hold. This wasn't Impressionism or Cubism or anything else the world had seen. It wasn't a style that softened or explained. It was abstract expressionism, loud, physical, alive. And in Pollock's hands, it roared. He poured himself into the movement without apology. The canvases were vast, unbounded, often without a clear focal point. Instead of inviting the viewer to observe, they demanded full surrender. You didn't look at a Pollock painting. You entered it, fell into it, lost in the chaos and rhythm. Critics were confused. Some called it genius. Others called it madness. But the energy was undeniable. His drip technique, which once seemed like a strange experiment, was suddenly the pulse of something new, something uniquely American, not borrowed from Europe or bound by tradition. It was rooted in the physical, the visceral, the now. He was dubbed Jack the Dripper by the media, a nickname that made light of the revolution he had started. But the truth was, Pollock had reshaped what art could be. His work was no longer about representing reality. It was about being reality fragmented, chaotic, alive. As he gained attention, his paintings became larger, louder. He filled rooms. He filled imaginations. His canvas, Autumn Rhythm, stretching over 17 feet long, didn't depict a scene. It evoked a state of mind, motion without destination, storm without center. And in that unmoored turbulence, people saw themselves, the rage beneath, but beneath the rhythm and energy was a man unraveling. Pollock was never at ease. From a young age, he had battled demons, alcoholism, anxiety, a feeling of not quite belonging. His success brought more eyes, more expectations. And with that came pressure that tightened around him like a noose. He drank heavily, unpredictably. Sometimes he would vanish for days, returning with trembling hands and a silence that lingered. Art had once been his outlet, his exorcism. But as the spotlight grew hotter, it also grew crueler. He questioned his work. Was it still honest? Was it still his? Or was he performing what people expected of him? Relationships frayed. He fought with friends, alienated supporters. His wife, the painterly Krasner, remained his anchor for many years. But even she struggled to hold him steady as he spiraled. His anger bled into everything, into slammed doors, into broken glasses, and eventually back into his work. Some of his later paintings turned darker, less fluid, more fractured. The drips became jagged, the colors less jubilant. Pollock had once said, "Painting is self-discovery." Every good artist paints what he is, and so his canvases reflected the splinters of a man trying to hold himself together. Every flick of paint was both an outburst and a confession. In his art, you could see the push and pull, a man torn between wanting to disappear and needing to be seen, a silence after storm. The end came not with paint, but with wheels on asphalt. In August of 1956, Jackson Pollock's car veered off a country road in New York. He had been drinking. He was driving fast. The crash killed him instantly. He was only 44. News of his death spread quickly, and with it came a strange kind of stillness, as though something loud and primal had been suddenly muted. The art world mourned. But more than that, it paused. Pollock had lived like a fire, wild, flickering, impossible to contain. And just like that, he was gone, yet his work remained. Massive canvases still hung in galleries like thunderclouds caught mid-roar. Viewers stood before them, silent, overwhelmed. The paint no longer moved, but it still felt like it might. Still alive. Still trembling with the motion that created it. In time, his legacy only grew. Artists spoke of him as a prophet of emotion. His methods, once mocked, became milestones. Museums built entire wings around his canvases. Critics re-examined what it meant to create without control, to trust the chaos. Today, Jackson Pollock's name evokes more than a man. It evokes a storm, a moment in art where lines became lives, where chaos became clarity, where painting became something that didn't need to represent, because it simply was. He had once said, "The painting has a life of its own. I try to let it come through," and in the silence after his passing, that life continues pulsing, untamed, unforgettable. Chapter 14, Velázquez and the Royal Illusion. The Spanish court of the 1600s was a place of hushed footsteps and heavy tapestries, where silence held power and portraits whispered truths too dangerous to speak aloud. Within this solemn world, Diego Velázquez moved not as a loud voice, but as a quiet force, brush in hand, eyes always watching. Appointed as court painter to King Philip IV, Velázquez was more than a craftsman. He became an observer of secrets. In the candlelit corridors of the Alcazar of Madrid, he painted not just faces, but layers of tension, the weight of monarchy, the burden of appearances, the fragile dance between ruler and ruled. His portraits of Philip IV were nothing like the stiff ceremonial images of the past. Instead, they showed a king worn by rule, caught between dignity and fatigue. His armor gleamed, but his expression drifted far away, as if already lost to time. Velázquez painted him again and again, each time peeling back a little more. Of the myth, but Velázquez didn't stop at royalty. He painted jesters and dwarfs, poets and generals, all with the same quiet reverence. In these works, status fell away. He saw people, not positions. There was a calm dignity in the way he handled the overlooked. Their clothes might have been simple, but their eyes told stories just as deep. A tea court, he was trusted, respected, but never flamboyant. He rarely signed his paintings. He never bragged. And yet, with every quiet stroke, he captured something others missed: the soul beneath the surface. In a palace built on illusion, Velázquez painted the truth. Gently, carefully, always with light, never with accusation. In the soft shadows of his portraits, the Spanish court found not just its likeness, but its reflection. Las Meninas and the Invisible Observer in 1656. Inside a studio deep in the palace, Velázquez painted what many now call his masterpiece, Las Meninas. But it was not just a painting. It was a puzzle, a mirror, a whisper from across the centuries. At first glance, it seems simple. A young princess surrounded by her attendants. The Infanta Margarita, with her pale dress and curious eyes, stands at the center. Around her, ladies in waiting, a dwarf, a dog resting on the floor. A moment captured in passing, but then you look closer. In the left background, Velázquez himself stands behind a giant canvas, paintbrush paused, as if we've just interrupted him. He looks out not at his subject, but at us, as though we are the ones being painted. In the dim mirror on the far wall, a royal reflection glows faintly, the king and queen. But they are not in the room. They are behind us, or perhaps in front of the canvas. Are we looking through their eyes? Or is it their image peering into their own legacy? This quiet tangle of sight and illusion made Las Meninas one of the most studied works in art history. Who is watching whom? Who is truly the subject? The princess? The artist? The viewer? Velázquez turned the canvas into a question, and in doing so, he placed himself, the artist, inside the royal space, next to his subjects, not beneath them. In this single image, he claimed his place as not just a servant to the court, but an equal within its world. He made art about perception itself. He made the viewer part of the painting. The scene remains frozen in soft golden light, as if the moment is still unfolding. A breath held. A truth paused. In Las Meninas, Velázquez invited the world to step beyond the frame, to look not at the painting, but through it, brushes and mirrors. Velázquez never lectured, never declared himself a genius. Instead, he let the brush speak, and what it said was layered, complex, always just shy of certainty. He loved mirrors. He loved windows, not for decoration, but for reflection. They appeared in his paintings, again and again, showing not just light, but the act of seeing itself. In the world Velázquez painted, vision was never passive. To see was to choose, to interpret, to step closer to the truth, or further away. He blurred boundaries between observer and subject, between painter and painted. In his Rokeby Venus, the goddess lounges with her back to the viewer, looking into a mirror. But the reflection is not quite aligned. It's off, subtle, a quiet reminder that even reflections lie. Was the goddess aware of being watched? Was she inviting us in or turning away? Velázquez never gave answers. He painted spaces where the viewer had to ask their own questions. And perhaps that was the point. In his world, art wasn't just for admiration. It was for thinking, for wondering, for lingering, even in portraits of the most powerful men. He never idealized. He humanized. Cardinals looked tired. Soldiers looked gentle. Power became soft. Beauty became complex. His brush held patience. Every layer of oil translucent. Controlled was a meditation. Not flashy, not loud, but lasting. Velázquez did not seek to impress. He sought to reveal. And in doing so, he held up a mirror not just to Spain, but to all who had come after. Legacy and layers. When Velázquez died in 1660, he left behind more than paintings. He left a way of seeing. For centuries, artists looked back at his work with awe. Goya, haunted by shadows, borrowed Velázquez's realism. Manet called him the painter of painters. Picasso, in the height of modernism, returned to Las Meninas, reimagining it in bold, fractured forms as if trying to unravel the mystery Velázquez left behind, but the influence went beyond brushwork. Velázquez changed the role of the artist. No longer just a servant of power, but a quiet mind within it. A witness. A mirror. His vision taught that art was not about flattery. It was about presence. About truth. Not truth as fact, but truth as feeling, the kind that lingers even after the viewer walks away. In museums today, people still stop before his work. They don't rush. They lean in. His portraits do not shout. They wait. They invite, and in that invitation lies his genius. Velázquez never claimed to know everything, but he painted as if he understood the silence between things, the hush behind the throne, the stillness inside a stare. He showed the world that painting could be more than image, it could be experience. He reminded us that art is not only what we see, but how we see it, and in every quiet canvas, in every carefully lit figure, his legacy continues, not loud, but lasting. A gentle echo in the long halls of time. Chapter 15, O'Keeffe and the bloom of solitude in the stillness of a studio, where light touched canvas as softly as breath on glass. Georgia O'Keeffe leaned in close, closer than most would dare. She studied a single flower, not as a decoration, but as a world unto itself. Her paintings of blossoms were not polite. They were not dainty. They were bold, vast. Petals stretched across the canvas like landscapes, edges curling with quiet strength, centers pulsing with mystery. She did not paint flowers as they sat in a vase. She painted them as they were fierce, intricate, alive. Critics often misread her. They searched her work for symbols she never claimed, for meanings she never voiced. They said her flowers were metaphors for intimacy, for femininity, for desire. She disagreed. When you take a flower in your hand and really look at it, she once said, it's your world for the moment. In those close-ups, O'Keeffe wasn't whispering. She was commanding the viewer to stop to see. The folds of a petal became the folds of thought, of feeling, of what it meant to inhabit a body and a silence all at once. Each bloom was a quiet rebellion. In a world that often overlooked the feminine, she made it enormous, not as object, but as subject, as soul. Her flowers were not portraits of plants. They were portraits of perception, reminders that the small holds the vast, and that attention, not noise, reveals the truth of things, the New Mexico years in time, the rhythm of New York, its chatter, its critiques, its rooms full of art. And ambition began to wear thin. O'Keeffe longed for space, not just physical distance, but emotional stillness. In 1929, she traveled west. What she found in New Mexico was not emptiness, but clarity. The desert greeted her with silence, a wide golden hush that stretched beyond the eye's reach. Here, the sky met the earth without pretense. No skyline, no clutter, just light, wind, and stone. She returned again and again, each visit carving out a deeper sense of home. Eventually, she settled there alone, by choice. Her house in Ghost Ranch became her sanctuary. No horns, no crowds. Just cliffs that caught the sun like kindling, and plains that rolled like sleeping animals dot in that space. She painted not from memory, but from presence. She watched how shadows changed shape as the day grew old. She walked paths where bones lay bleached by sun, not buried. She lived with the land not over it, not against it, but beside it. Her work shifted. The forms remained strong, but the palette softened. Pale blues, sandy whites, rusted reds. She no longer painted what people expected. She painted what she saw when no one else was looking. New Mexico gave her a different kind of solitude. Not lonely, but liberating. It was a silence that filled rather than emptied. And from it, O'Keeffe drew a strength that echoed across her canvases like wind across stone. Bones and mountains in the desert, nothing is wasted. Bones are not hidden. They are left to the sun and wind, turning pale and smooth monuments to what once breathed. Georgia O'Keeffe saw in them not death, but a kind of poetry. She began to collect them, skulls, antlers, fragments of spine. She didn't gather them as trophies, but as symbols. In her paintings, a cow skull floated against a sky as soft as milk. Horns curved upward like questions, poised in quiet defiance. These images were not morbid. They were meditative. She placed bones and flowers together, showing that life and loss were not separate stories, but the same one told in different light. Mountains became companions too. The red hills of Abiqui, the flat-faced cliffs that rose like ancient guardians. She painted them not from a distance, but as if she had lived inside them. Each curve and crease of rock captured with reverence. Even clouds took on a new presence. Long and low, like thoughts stretched across the sky. Her view of the world was wide, but never cold. The shapes she chose were not just natural. They were necessary. Through bones and mountains, O'Keeffe spoke of endurance, of beauty that did not fade, even in silence. She made art not about escape, but about encounter. To see her work was to stand still, to listen without noise, a vision entirely her own. Georgia O'Keeffe did not chase movements. She did not join schools of thought or follow trends. She painted alone and on her own terms. From the start, she resisted categories. She was not an impressionist, not a surrealist, not a symbolist. She was not the female painter that critics tried to define through gender or muse. She was simply O'Keeffe, and that was enough. She painted skyscrapers in New York, not as monuments of steel, but as living forms. She painted flowers that refused to shrink. She painted bones that hovered in the sky, neither fallen nor forgotten. People tried to explain her. They looked for metaphors. They searched for signs. But O'Keeffe knew that vision was not always about message. Sometimes it was simply about seeing. She trusted her eye, trusted her hand. She said little, but her art spoke with clarity. Her lines were spare, her colors precise. Her compositions balanced not with symmetry, but with honesty. She once said, "I decided to start anew to strip away what I had been taught to accept as true my own thinking, that choice quiet." Personal became her revolution. Over time, her influence grew, not loudly, but deeply. She became a lighthouse for those seeking to create without compromise, and even as her eyesight dimmed in her final years, her vision remained intact. She continued to work sculpting, sketching, touching the world through form and space. Today, Georgia O'Keeffe is remembered not just for her paintings, but for the way she looked. Her gaze focused, fearless, and free remains a guide for anyone who dares to see the world as wholly their own. Chapter 16. Dali's Theater of Dreams. In a world where most artists tried to explain reality, Salvador Dali set it ablaze and walked through the smoke. His presence alone was a performance, the upward curl of his mustache, the wide gaze of his eyes, the slow, deliberate voice that echoed like a spell. To some, he seemed eccentric, to others, divine. But to Dali, he was simply free. Born in Catalonia in 1904, Dali felt the pull of the strange from an early age. He spoke often of dreams, of death, of time. He believed he had lived before. He believed in destiny, not in a mystical sense, but in the power of imagination to create one's own truth. He didn't just paint surrealism. He became it. He wore capes, carried walking sticks, and entered galleries as if stepping onto a stage. He believed an artist should astonish, and he took that mission seriously. Even his mustache became a symbol, two sharp strokes reaching upward, like antennae to another realm. Dali's performances, his antics, his myth, making all of it was part of a larger canvas. A theater of dreams where the self could be. Stretched, distorted, and reassembled like one of his own melting clocks. But behind the spectacle was something deeper, a sharp, methodical mind. He read Freud. He studied physics. He spoke of paranoia as a creative tool, a way to unlock hidden patterns between unrelated things. He called it the paranoiac critical method. In Dali's world, nothing was accidental. Every gesture, every flourish, every stare into the camera was intentional, a frame within the film of his life. He was not just an artist. He was a mirror, reflecting the dreamscape that lived beneath waking life. Time like wax in 1931, Dali painted a vision that would haunt the modern world, the persistence of memory. A barren landscape, sparse and golden. A branch, a table, a cliff, and on them soft, melting clocks draped like cloth over wood and stone. Time, in Dali's hands, was no longer firm, no longer ticking. It had turned liquid, stretched by sunlight, bent by sleep. It wasn't simply a painting. It was a riddle, one that asked if memory could be trusted, if reality had weight, or if we were all just watching the dream of someone else. The painting was small, barely larger than a sheet of paper, but it echoed louder than canvases 10 times its size. People stood before it, unable to explain why it unsettled them, yet unable to look away. Dali said the clocks were inspired by cheese, a camembert left too long in the sun. But that answer, like so many of his, felt more like a wink than a truth. In surrealism, after all, the line between sense and nonsense was part of the performance. Over the years, he returned to the theme of time often. Soft clocks, crumbling towers, decay in beautiful disguise. In his dreamscapes, the natural laws no longer applied. The future was uncertain, the past unreliable, but these distortions were painted with care. His brushwork was smooth, his colors controlled. The illusion was wild, but the technique was exact. In bending time, Dahl gave form to a feeling everyone knows, that memories shift, that moments slip away, that time, no matter how solid, can melt. Dream logic painted precisely. For all his strangeness, Dahl was no outsider to tradition. He trained in classical techniques, studying anatomy, shadow, and perspective with the same devotion a monk gives to scripture. His early works echoed the Renaissance, full of depth and balance. This paradox the surrealist with the hand of an old master defined much of his work. His dreams were bizarre, yes. Elephants with spider legs, drawers in the flesh, skies filled with burning giraffes, but they were painted with precision. Lines were sharp, figures were clear. There was no blur, no mess, no accident. He once said, "Give me 2 hours a day of activity, and I'll take the other 22 in dreams." But those dreams were built on structure. Under the melting forms was a solid armature, one forged in practice and discipline. He was obsessed with light, with space, with the mechanics of vision. He studied optics. He explored holography. He was drawn to mathematics, especially the golden ratio. The closer he came to chaos in theme, the more exact he became in execution. And yet, it wasn't contradiction. It was harmony. Dahl believed that logic and madness were not enemies, but partners. That clarity could sharpen the surreal, making it more potent. That a dream, when painted clearly, feels even stranger because it resembles truth. Through this balance, Dahl built a visual language unlike any other, where the impossible felt plausible and the unreal became unforgettable. The surrealist. Exile for a time, Dahl stood at the center of surrealism, walking among artists and poets who sought to crack open the subconscious. But Dahl, always theatrical, always defiant, didn't stay in step for long. He clashed with Andrew Breton, the founder of the surrealist movement. Where others leaned toward politics and revolution, Dahl leaned toward spectacle and fame. He admired Freud, flirted with religion, and refused to condemn Franco choices that fractured friendships and turned many against him. Breton dubbed him Avida Dollars, a rearrangement of Dali's name, accusing him of greed and vanity. It stung, but Dahl, never one to retreat, leaned into it. He painted coins. He built a museum in his hometown of figures that looked like a dream turned inside out. He designed jewelry. He appeared in films. He walked a pet anteater through Paris. He didn't just paint art. He lived it. This defiance made him an exile, but also an icon. Critics rolled their eyes, but the public stared, fascinated. Museums welcomed him. Collectors chased him. He had become larger than his work, a walking mystery wrapped in lace and gold, and yet, beneath the costume, there remained an artist of deep seriousness. In private, he worked obsessively. He spoke of death, of God, of space and science. In his later years, his paintings grew darker, exploring decay, absence, and the breaking of form. When his beloved wife and muse, Gala, died, something shifted. The color drained. The theater quieted. He painted less, spoke less. The mustache remained, but the man behind it seemed farther away. In 1989, Dal passed away in the same Catalonian town where he was born. But his dream never ended. His paintings still hang ticking softly in minds across the world. They do not explain. They do not reassure. They simply invite us to step through the curtain, into the strange theater where time melts, dreams walk, and the self is both question and stage. Chapter 17. Titian and the Empire of Color. The gods of old once lived in marble, frozen in ideal forms, untouched by breath or time. But in the hands of Titian, they came alive in oil and color, blazing not with perfection, but with passion, born. In the quiet mountain town of Pieve di Cadore, Titian found his way to Venice, a city of light, water, and mirrors. There, surrounded by the shimmer of canals and the glint of Byzantine gold, he discovered the power of color, not just as surface, but as voice. In Bacchus and Ariadne, a god leaps from a chariot, arms outstretched. A startled woman turns, her robes caught mid-motion. Around them, satyrs dance, and vines curl like laughter. It is a scene from myth, yes, but the bodies sweat, the eyes shine, the flesh glows. This is not a story told. It is a moment lived. In Venus of Urbino, the goddess lies on a bed, gaze steady, hand resting softly. She is not distant, not divine in the cold sense. She is warm, present, human. The red of the cushions pulses against her pale skin, as if the room itself breathes with her. In his paintings of Mars and Venus, of Diana and Actaeon, of Europa and the bull, Titian painted myth not as symbol, but as experience. His figures did not pose. They felt. They wept, longed, embraced. The old gods were no longer statues. They were flesh, vulnerable, radiant, and full of fire, and through them, he invited the viewer not to observe, but to feel. To stand not before history, but inside it, the flesh and the divine. For Titian, the sacred and the sensual were not opposites. They were threads of the same cloth, one woven from longing, from grace, from the mystery of being alive. In his Assumption of the Virgin, light streams downward like water poured from heaven. The apostles below lift their arms toward the rising figure of Mary, who is swept upward in a whirl of cloud and glory. But look closer, and her face is not distant. It is tender. Her hands reach, not to escape the world, but to gather its sorrow. Insti. Mary Magdalene, the saint, clutches her chest, hair cascading like a river, eyes turned not upward, but inward. Her sorrow is human, her faith aching. The divine shines through her skin like sunlight through leaves, soft, imperfect, alive. In his sacred works, Titian painted saints who doubted, who suffered, who yearned. They were not remote symbols. They were people with cracked voices and trembling hands, and in turn, his mythological paintings carried that same tenderness. A mortal girl on a bed of roses, a dying god with closed eyes, a nymph who knows she is being watched. He painted no borders between holy and human, because, in his eyes, the divine lived within the mortal. The sacred was not beyond us. It was among us, this quiet fusion, this mingling of the eternal and the earthly, gave his paintings a resonance that echoed far beyond the churches and courts they adorned. They did not preach. They sang, read like reverence more than form, more than story. It was color that gave Titian his power. And among all colors, red was his flame. He did not use it lightly. When red entered the canvas, it arrived like music, not loud, but deep. A robe, a cushion, a sash glowing like embers beneath a dusk sky. His reds were not flat. They breathed. They held warmth and weight, like the memory of a voice long gone. He layered pigments, letting light sink into the surface, then bounce back in a glow that felt alive. It wasn't just about beauty. It was about atmosphere, about emotion, made visible dot in the entombment. The red of Christ's shroud bleeds across the canvas, pulling the eye, pulling the heart. It is not just color. It is grief dot in the presentation of the Virgin. A red curtain frames the moment not as decoration, but as stage. The girl climbs the temple steps, tiny and brave, while around her the crowd watches. The red holds it all, the tension, the reverence, the Titian understood that color was not accessory. It was voice. And red for him was the voice. Of life, its danger, its desire, its divinity, other painters noticed. Rubens studied him. Velázquez watched closely. Even centuries later, painters like Manet and Cézanne saw in his palette a kind of courage, a willingness to let emotion burn through surface, and so, in every gallery where his works hang, there remains a flicker of red, a warmth that calls not to the eyes alone, but to something deeper, a brush that grew bolder. Titian lived long. He painted into his 80s, and as his body aged, his spirit sharpened. The lines in his paintings grew looser, the forms softened, but the emotion, the energy grew wilder. He began to let the brush move more freely. Faces blurred, shadows deepened. The paint thickened like the skin of old trees. What had once been precise now became expressive, as if the hand, knowing time was short, chose feeling over control. In the flaying of Marsyas, one of his last great works, the god is punished, strung upside down, his skin stripped as punishment. Around him, figures watch, some calm, some cold. The scene is brutal, but the brushstrokes are raw, alive, almost violent. Reds and browns swirl like blood in water. There is no neatness. Only truth.it is not a painting meant to soothe. It is meant to be felt. In these final years, Titian abandoned polish. He let the paint speak, let the figures breathe, let the flaws remain. And in doing so, he became modern centuries before modernism would have a name. His late works, once misunderstood, are now seen as windows into the heart of creation, messy, urgent, full of fire. They remind us that mastery is not control. It is courage, courage to loosen the grip, courage to trust the mark, courage to end not with silence, but with flame. Titian died during a plague in Venice, but his fire never went out. It glows still, in every painting that dares to feel, in every red that dares to burn. Chapter 18, Matisse and the Shape of Joy. In 1905, at the Salon d'Automne in Paris, a riot of color burst from the canvas: wild oranges, deep purples, greens that glowed unnaturally. Henri Matisse stood among them. calm, serious, as critics gasped. Someone called it the work of les fauves, the wild beasts. And the name stuck for Matisse. It was never about breaking rules. It was about painting what he felt, not what he saw. Traditional shading, realistic color, he left those behind. Instead, he gave us skies of red, faces of blue, shadows of yellow. His paintings didn't mimic nature. They interpreted emotion. In Woman with a Hat, his wife, Am Lai, wears a feathered hat that dances with color. Her face is green and pink, as if lit from the inside. Viewers were shocked. To them, it looked unfinished, unruly. But to Matisse, it was alive. He believed that color could be more than decoration. It could be expression, a language all its own. His brush strokes were thick, sometimes rough, but always full of energy. His figures bent and stretched, not by anatomy, but by feeling. In the joy of life, nudes frolic under golden trees. There, bodies flowing like music. The perspective is flattened. The forms are simple, but the spirit, it dances. This was Matisse's awakening, not to fame, but to freedom. Color to him was not about realism. It was about radiance. He didn't want to describe the world. He wanted to uplift it. When lines danced as Matisse aged, illness began to weigh on him. His body, once so mobile, grew stiff. Surgeries left him in bed for long stretches. But his spirit, his vision remained light, and so he turned to something new. With scissors in hand, he began to cut. Colored paper, painted in bold, flat tones, became his medium. The brush was gone, but now the blade danced. This era, which he called painting with scissors, produced some of his most joyful work. The forms were simple: leaves, birds, waves, dancers. But each shape seemed to move. Each composition carried rhythm. Space and color sang together. In the blue nudes, female forms twist and turn in pure silhouette. There are no eyes, no faces, and yet you feel their presence, their posture. Their calm. In the sheaf, bright leaf-like shapes bloom across a white field as if a gust of wind had scattered color in midair. These cutouts were more than design. They were affirmation. After years of painting, studying, and revising, Matisse reached a new clarity, a place where joy didn't need detail. It just needed balance. He arranged the shapes with great care. The spacing, the direction, the weight of one color against another. It was like composing music, where silence is as important as sound, and through these vibrant forms, he shared something profound: that simplicity can be strength, that play can be serious, and that even from a bed, one can still make art. That dances, art as escape. The world around Matisse was not always kind. He lived through 2 world wars. He faced deep illness. He lost friends, watched cities fall, and felt the cold breath of uncertainty again and again. But in his art, he made a different choice. While others painted anguish, he painted peace. Not because he didn't see the pain, but because he believed in creating something to counter it. In the Red Room, a simple scene unfolds: a table set for dinner, a window looking out to trees. But the entire room is covered in red. A red so deep, so warm, that the walls seem to hum. It's not realistic. It's not logical. But it invites you in, and once inside, you don't want to leave. Matisse once said he wanted his art to be a soothing, calming influence on the mind, like a good armchair, not as escape in the shallow sense, but as refuge. He believed beauty had value. That delight was not decoration, but necessity, even when bedbound. He filled his room with color. Assistants pinned large sheets to the walls so he could guide the cutouts from his wheelchair. He created flowers when none could be picked. He painted skies when the outside seemed far. His joy was not naive. It was chosen, deliberate. His art whispered, "There is still light. There is still balance. There is still space to breathe." And in that quiet offering, he gave his viewers permission to rest, to hope, to dream again. The chapel of color, near the end of his life, Matisse took on a project unlike any before. In the town of Vinci, high in the hills of southern France, he designed a chapel. It was called the Chapel of the Rosary, but it became known simply as Matisse's Chapel. It was not grand in size, not made of marble or crowned with gold, but within its walls lived something rare, a complete vision. The windows, the murals, the altar cloths, all designed by him. A place not of doctrine, but of color and light. The stained glass windows glowed with blues, yellows, and greens. Simple shapes that poured sunlight in like liquid joy. When morning came, the colors danced across the white floors. When dusk fell, the glow softened, like breath slowing before sleep. The walls were white, not to be bare, but to be still. Upon them, Matisse painted in sweeping black lines a Madonna, a child, a tree. The strokes were bold, but never loud. They felt timeless, as if drawn not with paint, but with memory. He said it was his masterpiece. Not because it was the most complex, but because it brought everything together: his love of color, his belief in simplicity, his longing to offer peace. Visitors often enter quietly. They sit, they look, they feel the space more than see it. And that, perhaps, was the point. The chapel was not built to impress. It was built to comfort. In this final act, Matisse turned a building into a painting, and a painting into a prayer, not of words, but of color. A farewell, softly spoken, in shades of joy. Chapter 19, Warhol and the Mirror of the Masses. Not a grand painting of gods, not a stirring landscape or a reclining muse, but a can of soup. Ordinary, familiar, found in every kitchen across America. Yet, in 1962, when Andy Warhol painted 32 Campbell's soup cans, one for each variety, he didn't just paint food. He painted a shift. It was art that didn't feel like art. Clean lines, repetition, no brushstrokes, no emotion. The soup cans lined the gallery walls like shelves in a supermarket. Viewers were confused. Some laughed. Some felt insulted. But no one looked away. Warhol wasn't trying to fool them. He was holding up a mirror saying, "This is what we consume. This is what we worship. This is our modern icon." And then came Marilyn, blonde, luminous, already lost. He printed her face again and again, silk-screened in bright colors: neon pinks, cold blues, toxic yellows. Not to honor her, but to question her, to ask, what happens when a person becomes a product? He did the same with Elvis, with Mao, with Coca-Cola bottles. Fame, power, products. He flattened them all into the same space. Equal, interchangeable. Warhol wasn't mocking, but he wasn't praising either. He hovered somewhere in between. Like static on a screen, both part of the signal and the noise. In doing so, he made the everyday strange. He showed that beauty could be synthetic, that repetition could reveal truth, that art, like advertising, could be mass-produced and still somehow be personal. The factory and the frame on East 47th Street in Manhattan, behind silver-covered walls and stacks of screen prints. Warhol built a space that blurred the line between life and art. He called it the factory. It wasn't a typical studio. It was a stage, a laboratory, a home for the strange and the glamorous. Artists, drag queens, rock stars, poets, runaways, they all came. They talked, they filmed, they danced, and everything was recorded. The factory wasn't just where Warhol made art. It was the art. Their creativity mingled with commerce. Paintings were produced like products. Assistants pulled prints. Pieces were signed. Editions were sold. It was business. But it was also performance. Warhol removed the myth of the solitary genius. He let others help. He let machines print. He let the surface speak louder than the soul. He filmed people doing nothing, sleeping, eating, staring. He called these films art, because for him, attention was enough to make something matter. The factory, the frame wasn't just around the artwork. It was around the room, the people, the moment. The camera lens replaced the canvas. The viewer became part of the show, yet beneath the flashing lights, the silver walls, and the endless parties, there was a kind of emptiness, a rhythm without melody, a world where everything was seen but nothing truly touched. Warhol once said, "I want to be a machine at the factory." He tried 15 minutes and forever in an age before social media, before viral fame and endless scrolling. Warhol said something that echoed louder with each passing year. In the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes. At the time, it sounded strange, maybe even a joke. But today, it feels prophetic. Warhol saw something few did, that attention would become currency, that being seen even briefly would hold power. He saw the hunger for fame not as vanity, but as a need, a longing to be known, if only for a moment. He collected faces, not just the rich and powerful, but anyone willing to be captured. He photographed strangers. He turned friends into icons. With his Polaroid, he created instant myth. His portraits were flat, but they shimmered. Bright colors, sharp outlines, and beneath them, a vacancy. Eyes that stared back without revealing anything. He didn't chase depth. He chased the surface and found meaning there. Warhol. Celebrity was less about talent and more about presence, the ability to exist in the spotlight, to reflect what others wanted to see. He understood that in a world of images, repetition could build recognition, and recognition could build worship. 15 minutes of fame, a short burst. But in Warhol's hands, those 15 minutes became eternal, frozen in neon, hung in museums, printed on posters, scrolled endlessly online. He captured a future where fame would be fast, fragile, and everywhere, and somehow he made it last. the ghost in the machine behind the silver wigs and mirrored sunglasses. Behind the silk screens and sound bites, Warhol remained a mystery, quiet, pale, watchful. He rarely spoke about emotion. He often deflected. But in his art, something else lingered, something darker. He painted car crashes, suicides, electric, chairs. Not loudly, not with gore, but with cold repetition. Again and again. As if showing the same image would numb it or make it real, he painted skulls. Not dramatic, just present. Quietly waiting, he painted guns, knives, empty beds. He painted shadows, even his portraits, so bright and playful, held a kind of stillness, a stillness that suggested loneliness. The colors shouted, but the eyes whispered. Warhol had grown. Up sick, fragile, often alone. His early drawings of shoes, of boys, of celebrities, they were full of longing. A longing to be close, but not touched. Seen, but not known. He never married. He rarely revealed. And even at his most famous, he seemed slightly apart, like he was watching life through a screen dot. In 1968, a woman shot him. He survived. Barely. After that, something shifted. He became more guarded, more mechanical, more ghostly, and yet he kept creating. He filled his diary with lists. He filmed hours of silence. He painted a Last Supper with camouflage. He showed us everything but never himself. In the end, Warhol's art wasn't just about fame or commerce. It was about emptiness, about presence without connection, about the machine that records, but does not feel. But within that silence, he left echoes, soft, strange, still shimmering. Chapter 20, Kahlo and the Face Within. Frida Kahlo's life changed forever on a September day in 1925. She was just 18. A bus she boarded collided with a streetcar. The crash was violent. Her spine broke in multiple places. Her collarbone shattered. Her right leg was crushed. An iron handrail pierced through her pelvis. She lived. But she would never fully recover. For months, she lay in bed, body held by plaster, muscles stiffened by pain. A mirror was fixed above her bed so she could see herself. And in that mirror, she began to paint in the quiet of her room, surrounded by stillness. Frida reached for a brush. She could not walk. She could not sit upright, but she could look. And what she saw, she recorded not to please others, but to survive. Years later, in the broken column, she painted her own body split, down the middle. Her spine was a crumbling classical pillar. Dozens of nails pierced her skin. Tears ran down her cheeks, yet her gaze was steady. The painting did not beg for pity. It claimed truth. Throughout her life, Frida underwent over 30 surgeries. Each one left behind a scar. Each time, she returned to her easel, her sanctuary. For her, pain was not a weakness. It was the root of creation. Art became a ritual, a process of turning wounds into meaning. The act of painting became her rebellion, her healing, her quiet form of prayer, love, betrayal. In Diego in 1922, a young Frida stood beneath scaffolding at her school, watching Diego Rivera paint a mural. He was already famous, loud, passionate, revolutionary. She was bold, curious, and clever. Years later, she approached him with her work. He told her she had talent. Then they fell in love. They married in 1929. The match was electric. Two strong spirits deeply drawn, often clashing. She was 22. He was 42. She called them the elephant and the dove. Their relationship was full of contradictions. Diego inspired her. He praised her talent. He supported her growth. But he also betrayed her repeatedly. Affairs became a pattern, even with her sister. Christina, Frida didn't hide her heartbreak. She painted. It died in a few small nips. A woman lies bloodied, stabbed by her lover. In Diego and I, Frida stares outward, her face flushed, her tears falling, while Diego's portrait sits planted in her mind like a haunting. They divorced in 1939. But only a year later, they remarried. Not out of ease, but necessity. Their love never softened. It endured through pain, shaped by it. They lived in two houses joined by a bridge and image that said everything. Connected, but separate. Tio Frida, love was never tidy. It was fire and water, creation and collapse. It gave her stories. It gave her scars. And it gave her a reason to paint again and again. Roots, thorns, and revolution. Frida was never just painting herself. She was painting Mexico, its colors, its myths, its politics, its blood. She was proud of her heritage. She wore traditional Tijuana dresses, embroidered blouses, long skirts. Her hair was braided with flowers and ribbons. In every painting, her clothes said, "This is who I am." She surrounded herself with symbols, monkeys, deer, parrots, broken columns, desert landscapes. All carried meaning. All told parts of her story. In self-portrait on the borderline, Frida stands between two worlds: industrial America, gray and polluted, and vibrant Mexico, filled with roots, sun, and skulls. Her heart lies clearly with the latter. In my dress hangs there. Her Mexican clothing floats in the middle of a chaotic American scene full of factories, advertisements, and empty churches. She critiques modernity. She rejects capitalism. She insists on staying grounded in culture and struggle. Frida was deeply political. She joined the Communist Party. She believed in workers' rights. She welcomed revolutionaries, including Leon Trotsky, into her home. She painted banners and signed letters with red stars, but her art was never just propaganda. It was personal, intimate, and every image came with thorns. In one painting, she's wrapped in vines, bleeding. In another, she holds her own severed body. These were not dreams. They were real, both emotional and physical truths. Her art spoke of identity, not a surface one, but something deeper. She used Mexican culture as shield and sword. Color was her defense. Symbols, her vocabulary. She did not soften herself. For the viewer, she offered herself raw, flawed, political, human. A self-portrait of defiance. Frida painted herself over 50 times. But none were indulgent. Each was declaration. She stared into mirrors not to admire, but to document, to investigate, to remind the world she existed in spite of pain, in spite of abandonment, in spite of time. In one portrait, her eyebrows curve into a bird. In another, she is split in two, one side traditional, the other European. Veins leak from her. Heart. Her hands hold scissors. Her eyes stay calm. Her body was broken. Her legs weakened. She spent weeks, even months, unable to leave her bed. But still she painted. Assistants brought canvases to her room. They tilted easels beside her pillows. She painted in casts. She painted in corsets. Her portraits weren't meant to flatter. They were meant to reflect, to survive. She showed her mustache, her unibrow, her limp, her sadness, her rage, her strength, her joy. Everything she felt. She gave a face. In 1953, just a year before her death, doctors amputated part of her right leg. An exhibition was held in Mexico City, her first solo show in the country. She arrived in an ambulance, was carried on a stretcher, and placed in a bed in the middle of the gallery. She laughed. She sang. She drank with her guests surrounded by her work. That was Frida. Unstoppable. Defiant. Her final painting, finished just days before she died, was of watermelons. Bright, juicy, full of life. On one slice she wrote, "Viva la vida," long live. Life. Frida Kahlo died in July 1954. The cause remains uncertain. Some say illness. Others believe it was her own choice. But her words stayed behind. I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return. Yet return she did. Not in body, but in spirit, in color, in canvas. Her legacy is not just in museums. It's in hearts, in homes, in every person who has ever looked into the mirror and tried to find meaning through pain. Frida gave us her face again and again, not to ask for sympathy, but to remind us what it means to be real, cracked, radiant, enduring.